Good morning, everyone. Today is the September 7th. Let's start as usual. Sergey, since you are here, maybe you can cover both bug triage and also the testing status.
Yeah, as we just mentioned, many people off right now out of office, and we don't have many, like less than usual PRs created, just 18. So if you wonder what's going on, check them out. Among closed and merged, most of closed PRs either duplicates or some work in progress. I didn't find any rotten or otherwise forgotten PRs that needed to take care of. Yeah, and I think closer to enhancement freeze, we'll have more and more PRs piling up. So need to pick up pace, and hopefully September started and we'll have people coming back from whatever vacations they had. And bug triage, I don't think I have many updates right now. Yeah.
Thanks, Sergey. Okay, let's move to the proposed agenda. So may I have you ask, you want to talk about the ephemeral container? Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, hi, thank you. So just a little bit of context. I brought this up last week as well. So currently what's happening is in the ephemeral container skep, it's mentioned that if an ephemeral container is created for a pod, the way to identify said pod would be to add a new pod condition for it and have the kubelet set this pod condition on that pod. So I was working on adding this new pod condition, but as the discussion progressed, there was discussion around should this pod condition also cover cases of such as kubectl exec, for example, because the intent of such a pod condition would be to basically signify that this pod is no longer pristine, and then whoever is the cluster admin could then take decision in terms of what they want to do with it. So there was discussion around should such a pod condition also cover exec use cases, and Derek last week brought up that if it should cover exec, should it also cover container notifier type use cases as well? So my main point of feedback was, what do people think about having a single pod condition cover all three, or should it even cover all three, or should it just be scoped to ephemeral containers for now and later revisited? Maybe add another pod condition for exec use cases, or just have this one condition cover all three. So I spoke to Jing as well, so for container notifier, and her thoughts were that if such a pod condition were to cover exec, it should also cover container notifier, because that's just a more native way of doing exec. So yeah, so I just wanted to know what people thought about this. And so if like there is a certain direction to go in, then I can probably like update the cap before the enhancements freeze for ephemeral container so that we can have that change in.
I do think about if we want to cover off the exec, I want to also cover off the container notifier. But unfortunately, we cannot have like a form of the discussing, because I think a lot of people involved with either it is ephemeral container. I'm involved with ephemeral, but many people like Lee, original proposal and proposed author is not here, and Derek also is not here, and and also the container notifier, the both two author and owner is not here today, so we cannot form off the discussion debate. But in general, if we want to cover exit cases, definitely we should cover off the container notifier. But once we cover all those kind of things, in normal situation, there's a harder time for us to define the API. So this is why initially when Lee first and I discussed, we hope just only cover off the ephemeral container use cases back then, and then evolve to cover more. So I hope like the involved party be here, so then we can have the form of the debate and discuss it more meaningful here. Any other people have some other different opinion want to share with the Mahab here?
My question is how, like, if we will include exec and the container identifier, how much it changes the scope and like how much it delays ephemeral container promotion to beta? Like, can we add them later if needed? Was it discussed?
So adding it just for ephemeral containers isn't too big a change, especially. So I already have like a working draft PR for just ephemeral containers, but if you were to add it for exec, I suppose that would delay it by some amount. But I don't think it would affect ephemeral containers moving to beta, because um, you would the change to the cap would be the same. It would just mean that maybe what the name of the pod condition would be different if it were to cover exec cases as well. But then again, like you can't change the cap without deciding some of the other details. So
if cover of container notifier, I think will be definitely have the impact, but it doesn't make sense only cover exit, not the cover of the container notifier. So that's the problem is the container notifier, it a little bit remain unknown at this stage. Even we are kind of high level agree upon API, but there always have some unknown is still is remain, right? So that's a little bit concerned. So maybe Mahab, we can carry off the offline discussing, make all the people involved this in a small group, and so we can discuss and come back, report back to the SIG Node community. Do you think that's better?
yeah, that sounds good. So would it be okay if I like created a draft PR to update the cap and just assign or like CC the correct? Yeah, I'll do that.
Definitely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ryan and Clayton, I saw Clayton just joined. Do you want to talk about the static pod regression issue?
Sure. So as we've been working through the impact of the changes to the pod worker to more rigorously control, there's a couple of areas that were impacted. One is on the admission side. So admission is somewhat under tested, which we kind of realized over the last, there've been a couple of regressions where the admission side and how it's tested tests outcomes, but it doesn't really test all like the core logic of if this is rejected, is it kept? So there's a separate thing that we're kind of been tracking with the changes to how pod event or how pod workers are handled. That's kind of that difference between there's the desired state in the kubelet and the actual state. And so the change was a lot of like separating those out and making those clear. So like pod lifecycle was in a couple of places. Now it's consolidated. So the desired state, what the config says, and the actual state of walking each pod through its life cycle is much more rationalized. What we were working through and identified in the last week or two as a regression / previously undefined behavior that people were depending on is people are using static pod UIDs as a way of ensuring that there's only, like if the static pod is terminated, that the new static pod that's created after the update doesn't run at the same time as the old static pod. It turns out that the guarantees around that we actually provided are weaker than we thought. We've had bugs with like a static pod lifecycle and static pods that are being terminated, being reflected. The actual bug right now is that we didn't actually ever track the difference between two pods that are in design. So if you have a static pod and you make a completely incompatible change to it, you can quickly delete it and recreate it. And so you could like add new containers, you could change what volumes it's using, but it would have the same UID. A lot of parts of the kubelet only deal with things by UID, like the volume manager. And so what we've realized is because we allow you to keep that UID and make wildly incompatible changes, we were doing a workaround. Some of the places where this was detected was The old static pod would be deleted. The new pod would be created, which is fine. You get deleted. It has the same UID, but there's a remove and an add. But that never took into account the fact that the kubelet is only really tracking in all of its loops. So the kubelet kind of has like the main pod worker loop, and there's a bunch of other loops, the volume manager, device managers, all that. They're only tracking things by UID. They don't actually know that the old instance of the pod is shut down, and they could have wildly different views. So like you've got the old version and the new version. They're completely different. They're incompatible. Like it's not something we've ever supported on the API server, adding or removing containers. The other loops have no idea which one is which, and they can't ask the rest of the kubelet which one is which, because the UID is the same. So as part of this, it's basically, the UID is really, I'm starting to think that the use case that people have is they want their pods not to be running at the same time by reusing that UID. That's what it was being used in a couple places we've found this. It's not safe at all in the kubelet to only differ major changes of a previous instance of a pod and a new instance of a pod on just UID if we allow static pods to preserve UID. So like I'm going to fill up the deck or I'm going to fill out the doc a little bit more and send this around. But I wanted to get folks who have a previous experience with static pods to weigh in, because we're underspecified. There's no place to go reference to figure out what we actually think we should support is. My argument at this point would be all the static pod preservation stuff is wrong. And no matter what we're going to do, we're either going to have to change it so you can't preserve static pod UID under the covers, or we're going to have to add a new uniqueness tracker, which is going to be really complicated and I don't want to do, because fundamentally the kubelet, almost every loop in the kubelet is about UID, and it makes some really strong assumptions about lifecycle and UID and what changes are allowed that just aren't going to work with static pods, because static pods can, you can have 5 static pods all sharing the same UID. The pod config would randomly pick one of them. You could have an old version with the UIDs like shutting down and a completely different new version spinning up. All the other parts of the kubelet have to figure out some way to agree on what version that is, and what we have today isn't enough. So it is a thorny problem. I need folks who are familiar with static pod, what guarantees are being used by distributions, and people who are familiar with the initial implementations. We actually need to talk through what we actually are trying to support and what people depend on, because it's not safe to reuse static pod UIDs the way we're doing it now, and it's going to have to change. Something's going to have to change to work around it.
I believe that must be regression generated. Mental, I need your talk. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I just want to say that I think the static pod UID is generated based on the pod.
It is,
the pod object.
Unless you hard code one.
Yeah. I just read the code, and if in the static pod YAML file you hard code the UID, we will skip the generation hashing part. But I don't even know that people use it in that way, because my expectation is always that whenever you touch any part of the pod static YAML file, it should generate a new hash, and it will be a completely new pod. That's my assumption in my mind. But
the interesting thing is a pod. So pods in the API server should never have a duplicate UID. They can, because of like you could do a rollback. Like there's a bunch of cases where like it is actually possible to reuse a UID in the Kube API server, and we mostly work around like it's something that's it's almost impossible to end up with a reused UID in the Kube API server. It's not impossible, but it's almost impossible. Static pods are really not pods. They're a pod controller that is saying, I want there to be an instance of a pod that looks like this running. We didn't actually design them that way. And so the analogy I was thinking about is the behavior that you have if you don't specify a static UID is that you have a pod template, like a replication controller of size 1 inside the kubelet, and it's stamping out new instances. That's totally reasonable. And we can make that work. There's some actual other bugs that we realize that we need to go fix. when you reuse the static UID, it kind of breaks that assumption. Anyone using the static UID, and there's several people that I'm aware of, probably they're looking for a guarantee, which is if I change that, the old version of the pod is stopped before the new version is started. We didn't actually guarantee that before. And so, because like you could restart the kubelet and the old version would still be shutting down. So like there's a bunch of missing code that would provide that guarantee. We can't necessarily change the core behavior of the kubelet to like, there's a reason people need that, which is if you've got something that's managing unique access to an on-disk store, and the static pod, if you're running 2 instances of the static pod, we could change the behavior of kube underneath you. So what we need to do is figure out a way that you can signal to us, and maybe we deprecate the old static pod UID, or we just make it result in there being a unique identifier that you can use to guarantee exclusion of the 2 pods at the same time. So the problem is we didn't document what guarantees the static pod was providing. So one of my other statements would be like, need to go through and write down what we expect static pods to support feature-wise, so that we can say, because there's some tests missing as part of this, and that'll help close out what do we actually expect for. So Lantai, what you described is exactly what I expect people to use, except for the exclusion thing.
I just want to say that we document the static pod a couple times, always being deleted. People just don't listen. We don't want people abusively using static pod.
Where's the definition of that, Dawn? Where's the most authoritative definition besides the docs? Is there?
I just quickly, while you are talking, and quickly search, no matter based on what my comment and the Yuji's comment in the past. But here's the one comment in the issue. We basically talk about many times, and also there's the one. Here's some history. When the Kubernetes first founded, right? So there's the self-host of the pod, self-host of the cluster. So basically, it's a gateway of the static pod. So this is why I have a lot of other discussing, but it's never fly. So we know, we understand. People there's always have like the bootstrap, and some bootstrap, and before everybody, like even Kubernetes moved toward of the daemon side, there's the static pod. So we kind of have a way to static pod for like the master require of the daemon running on the node and doing the bootstrap, or maybe we can limit it first couple of the set of cluster, like the API server. That's kind of in the past what we are doing. But we want to have that visibility for the static pod, because Kubernetes is the controller there, and just start static pod. So we need the static pod to tolerate all the non-execute tolerance, if I refresh all the memory. And I kind of insist we introduce of the priority class. And if you remember that time, because people talk about the CoreOS, I said, okay, quality of the services cannot solve my problem for importance of the daemon running on the node without a schedule. So we have to introduce another concept, which is called priority class. So after we introduce priority class, we make the static pod, it is always critical and always have to schedule by the node, because that's out of our control. So all those kind of things. So basically, we want to static pod is make that minimal, but you are so right. We didn't really say guarantee of the exclusive of the UID, because we think about that's like the admin's job at the node, but you just cannot guarantee that cluster-wide that's unique, because people just hard-coded those things on the pod. And on the node, because we at the single node, we try to guarantee, but we just cannot guarantee on the cluster level.
Yeah, and I don't actually, like the use case, like having we probably, like static pods for better or worse are part of the V1 API. We've got a lot of machinery using it. What we probably, and I was mostly describing this in terms of like going and documenting like what we actually support on it. Like, is it allowed to reference a PVC from a static pod? Are you allowed to reference CSI drivers from a static pod? are you allowed to change and remove and report containers? Like even just saying like, here's this current state, what works or doesn't work would just help guide. And honestly, like as one of the consumers of it, Ryan and I kind of assume that we'll sign up for making sure the testing works, because when it breaks, we've been the ones who've broken it for ourselves. But it's good because it actually is highlighting, if we can go through and clarify what that minimal support is, I think that will also help. There was another area related to it, which was the lack of vagueness. Like, what does admission mean for static pods? And we have features of the kubelet that depend on admittance, like CPU manager. And so looking through, like, CPU manager was briefly broken by the regression at admission, which didn't have anything to do with static pods. But then that raises the question of what does it mean to reject a static pod at admission? And that raised a couple of other issues, like static pods have the life cycle is owned by the kubelet, not by the API server. So there's some scenarios where, like, how long should the kubelet refresh? So it was mostly just about trying to pull together all of what we guarantee into one spot, and then use that to go fix this issue and identify the tests that would prevent a regression in the future. Because it has pointed to weaknesses in, like, our testing regime with static pods, and also our testing of admission, which it was what the previous regression was, the one from 2 weeks ago.
So I just feel, I agree with you, but I just want to say that we've been documenting a couple times already. They're always being removed, and because people just think about the static pod so easy, and to using once if they have the small cluster, they never think about the cluster level, because the static pod they basically want to bypass the scheduler, and to do this pod allocation, right? Pod placement. But on the other hand, they want to do magical things. And when there's the resource starvation on the node level, they just say, oh my God, you have to guarantee and evict. But when you evict a daemon and some daemon site which is run as the static pod, they will say, oh my God, that's my must require. So you need to give us the signal. So this is why signal, it is quality of the services, and it is the priority. So that's why we made the decision, static pod things on the node side, we cannot do anything. That's the critical. There's no way for us to evict. We basically node die.
And actually, like, there's other things too, like we don't rerun admission for certain classes of thing. And the way that there was some confusion inside the kubelet as to what the actual admitted pods were, because what people are using to say what the like this was one of the bugs that came up as we were going through it, is today what people are using as, hey, show me all the admitted pods, is not actually all the admitted pods. You have to filter that list based on certain rules. And so one of the things that I think is a little unclear is, with the addition of more admission handlers in device manager and CPU, we've kind of opened the door for, we don't really have a crisp definition inside the kubelet code. We're mostly, I mean, the code, like, to the code's credit, we haven't had to change it in 5 years. As we've bulked those up, I think we're hitting some emergent things that make it harder for people to reason about. So at least it's a good opportunity for us to go and clarify what we mean, and offer guidelines for other people building admission hooks in the future.
I totally agree with you. I can see that a lot of the principle we made it is kind of loose, and a lot of things being forget, and or maybe evolved with the good intention, but those evolve. After evolve, maybe a lot of cause surface some existing problem used to be had, and expose new regression. So let's just redo the documentation.
And it'll help. It'll help for things like new caps that need to reference, like, what am I supposed to, like, someone being able to ask, what is this implication? Is this for static pods? Having a place to go reference and be like, oh, this is how static pods would be implemented. Is there a KEP document right now that controls admission and the design of the admission system within kubelet? Is there a single doc for that?
So we do have all the doc. Let me just look at it, but there's no KEP. The reason is because KEP systems way after all those kind of things done, include after static pod is way after the KEP, that way after we finish all the work, the major work. And then we have the booming of the cap, but the major things actually design is level change. I just want to say that
we're having that problem in other places. Like the whole thing that triggered all of this refactoring was the pods being force deleted. And that's a pre-KEP proposal that was written in 2015, right? It was after like one of those first meetings where we sat down and like wrote it. We haven't ever gone back. So I was going to refresh that because Jordan was like, hey, like if we want to change what the definition of forced deletion is, we need to specify it. We need to have a place to argue about it. So I think it is useful for at least those three concepts. I'm planning on doing the pod safety one. I can certainly help, Ryan and I can help with the static pod one. And then the admission one would probably be helpful. That would at least give us a chance to like write down like the stuff that Lantau and I were debating in the PR. Like we wanted to separate pod workers anyway. We want status to be separated. We want the plague life cycle, like some of those implications, get them down in one spot.
Totally, I agree. Maybe Sergey, do you want to take a look at the pod admission? I can help you on that one, so we can have the cover. This is the only things I think is not covered based on what Clayton, I agree. And we should refresh those things.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Any other people want to talk about on this topic? This is definitely surface a lot of issue, and we should, we should revisit. And a lot of hidden knowledge. It looks like it's not well documented. Yeah. Let's move to, if no other suggestion and also question, and then let's move to the next topic. Aditi, do you want to? I think you just want to, for your information, right? So I will handle this one. I will after this meeting and add into the spreadsheet. Any other thing you want to add it for this one?
I don't think she's on call, but thank you. I'll let her know.
Okay, I will add the update. I think the last time when I update the spreadsheet, I left this one. Yeah. Okay, next one. Vinay, do you want update on the pod vertical skinning?
Oh, I don't like. I think it's mentioned he's not on call in the talk.
Okay, that's also is just for your information, and also, yeah.
I think here he's asking to approve the PR that updates CAP. That updates milestone.
I will take a follow look on his CAP and approval. Yeah, after this meeting.
Okay, it's just a milestone update. Should be straightforward.
Yeah. So that's all from today's proposed agenda. Any other topic people want to discuss? If no, I think everyone got like 20 minutes, 25 minutes back. And Clayton, could you please, once you have the document ready, can you share for the static pod regression? Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.